Hello and welcome everybody to ICMDA webinars. I'm Dr. Peter Saunders, the Chief Executive of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association, which brings together over 80 national groups of Christian doctors and dentists around the world. And today is our 51st webinar since COVID began. And today we're privileged to have Dr. Shari Falkenheimer speaking to us on the subject of multiplying your impact through teaching. So how do I introduce Shari? Well, Dr. Shari Falkenheimer received her MD from the State University of New York, Upstate Medical University, her MPH from Harvard School of Public Health, and an MA in Bioethics and a PhD in Educational Studies from Trinity International University. And her 40 years as a physician have focused on medical leadership, teaching, and applied research. The Christian Medical and Dental Association of the US has played an important role in helping her through her medical school years and continues to be a major source of encouragement and fellowship for her. And in fact, she mentors the Albany, New York Medical College CMDA group. She loves to teach, and she's spoken and taught in over 30 countries worldwide. So it's our pleasure to have you, Shari, today to speak to us on multiplying your impact through teaching. Over to you. Thank you.
Well, it's a privilege to be with you today and to share with many colleagues in many different countries. And I hope what I share will be an encouragement and a motivation. Before we start, I wanted to ask you to think about, other than your family and your church friends, who has influenced you the most in your life and why? I know in my life, teachers have been a huge impact, not only at the elementary school level. I can still remember a lot of my teachers and throughout training, but in medical school, it was particularly important. I live in the northeastern US where it's not a real faith-friendly environment. And during medical school, only 2 of our professors publicly identified as Christians. But it was a great encouragement to talk with them and know there were some who did and who were willing to spend time with us and host us in their homes. So I think if you think about your life, you'll find there are many people who really helped you through the experiences you had with them as teachers. And that's why I feel passionate about teaching. So I want to help you understand a little more about how it can bring transformation as we educate and mentor our colleagues and our students. This is what we'll discuss. I want to talk a little bit about Jesus' ministry pattern. I'm sure it will be familiar to most of you, and the importance of multiplication in his ministry and beyond. And then I like to think of healthcare professionals as a kind of unreached people group. I'll talk a little further about that. And then give some examples of the impact and opportunities there are to teach healthcare professionals and students globally. I often work with an organization which is part of Christian Medical and Dental Association in the US called Medical Education International. And most of my experiences with them, so many of my examples will come from there. So this was the pattern of Jesus' ministry. He went all over Galilee teaching, preaching, and healing. I think it's nothing that we haven't heard before, but we need to keep in mind his threefold mission. Jesus didn't just teach or preach to people, but he cared about their individual needs, their physical needs. He often cured people, both of physical and mental diseases. And he also cared about their spiritual needs, not only preaching, but casting out demons and showing spiritual powers through miracles. He brought his followers into the same kind of ministry. He had them observe him, and then he sent out different followers to do similar things and even gave them special powers of healing so they could even do miracles. He also commanded us to do his work, and so we should continue doing all those different things. So why do I want to talk about multiplication? If we just work with one person and that person works with one person, very little progress will be made. But if we can work with a group of people who can work with or teach another group of people, it can have a huge impact. And that's been the pattern of the church, as you know. I think it's also shown in the way the ministry has come down to us. The Father sent the Son, and the Son was a role model, and he also gathered around him special people who were his disciples and other followers. They were a pretty limited number. You know, sometimes we wonder how big an impact we can have with the few people we interacted with, but he worked with primarily 12 people, only 11 of whom really followed him in the end. And through that, he sent them out through the Great Commission saying, as you go into the world, make disciples of all nations. And within a very short time, the gospel had spread across the whole Roman Empire and continues to spread today. So I think it's clear that the multiplication principle is part of his desire for our ministry. And that's the way we can continue to bring people to knowledge of him and see the Holy Spirit bring them into the kingdom. This has always been a verse that has been a little surprising to me, and I've thought about a lot. Why did he teach his disciples and other believers? He said, very truly, I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they'll do even greater things than these. How can we do greater things than Jesus? Certainly, we don't have his power. We're not God, although we do have his Holy Spirit. But greater doesn't always mean better or richer. It can also mean more numerous. And it's through the multiplication factor that we can do greater things. Jesus was truly a human, but he could only be in one place at a time. When he left and left his disciples, he had 12 people, so they could be in 12 places. And as they spread the knowledge of God to different parts of the world, their disciples could teach disciples. And the greater things is greater number. When there are hundreds or thousands or millions of believers, they can be in many more places and impact many parts of the world at the same time. So this is a summary of Jesus' ministry. He taught, preached, and healed. He worked compassionately and expressed love, which is one characteristic we never hear that Satan, the devil, can exemplify. So it's a characteristic of Jesus' disciples to love him and to love others. We can mentor a few. We probably, very few of us will speak to thousands or be on TV and impact millions, but we have people around us that we can encourage and mentor, and we can train people who can train others and help this process to go on. What does this look like in healthcare? I don't know about most of you, but when I went into healthcare training, my vision of it was it would be a mentorship. I would go to medical school. Those who were already trained would encourage me, help me to learn things, kind of put their arms around me when I needed encouragement and help me learn everything they knew. But I think if you're in healthcare, you know this is not what it's like. Unfortunately, training is often very difficult. There are people who put themselves in a positive light by putting other people down. They build themselves up by being critical. There are even people who are faculty that I've found out in some countries won't share everything they know because they're afraid that their students will get their job someday and know more than they do. And those are certainly not Christian ways of acting. So I think we can have an impact, even though it may be limited wherever we are, by characterizing our ministry of healing like Jesus, sharing all that we know in a caring way with our colleagues, making it a safe place to ask questions or ask for help, encouraging people. How often does anybody say something positive to you? I think just a small note of encouragement to people around you each day can have a huge impact. I remember when I was an intern really struggling, one of my senior residents just gave me a little card with a Bible verse on it. And it was such an encouragement that they really cared enough to do that. I still remember it now, over 40 years later. That can really be an example to unbelievers. Role modeling has been shown, and it's documented in the literature as one of the most important things in developing practice and how you practice healthcare. So if we act like Jesus, treat people holistically, effectively teach and mentor, people will often want to imitate us rather than negative examples they see around us. And that can have a great impact, as well as make life a lot more pleasant for all of us. We can partner transculturally. Certainly in the United States, we have a very multicultural country, and many of you may live in countries with many people from other nations or immigrants or refugees. And we can partner to meet their needs, and sometimes also go to different locations to assist each other. That's what we often do through the Ministry Medical Education International. We get requests from other countries to try to help them with some area they want more education or practical skills in, and help them with that. And as we serve, we'll be transformed and be more like Jesus. So if we were able to do all those things, we could see our students and our colleagues following God's call on their lives, being competent not only professionally, but spiritually in knowing how to care for people and be compassionate. We could see everyone thinking about their patients as someone made in God's image, rather than addicts or weak people or people that they look down on or use bad terms about. And the patients would be much more positively impacted and feel greater care. We would be having servants' attitudes. My former boss at CMDA, the former CEO here, for example, when he was a missionary doctor, at one point, there was quite a mess in the emergency room, and he stopped to help clean it up. And the nurses were just astounded, because that wasn't something doctors did. But just taking servants' attitudes in little things can have a huge impact and really speak to our colleagues. And then being used by God to help people move towards shalom and healing. Healing is not only physical, mental, and emotional, but it's meant to be full. Jesus said he came to give us life and give it abundantly. And so that's what he wants for us. And of course, we know these are aspirational goals. We live in a fallen world, and we won't see this in our lifetime. But I'd like each of us to keep this in mind as a goal and something we can strive for and work together with our colleagues for, and impact all those around us, both colleagues and patients. I think we should see teaching as mission. Teaching not only helps people learn, but can help them change. If you think about when you entered healthcare training, you were a civilian, you didn't know a lot about terminology or disease, and you were formed into a physician, a nurse, whatever your profession is during your training time. So it is a form of mission, and we can have a big impact that way. Of course, it does take some long-term commitment. You may never remember that I spoke to you for 1 hour, but people who taught you for a whole semester or a whole year or in your residency and were with you a long time will have a bigger impact on you. So it does take longer term commitment and building of relationships in order to really impact people. Also, a lot of places in the world that I've been, we really need to earn the right to be heard. Even in the West these days, Christianity is not very popular in many places. And, you know, we need to build relationships so people want to know something about us and give us the opportunities to share about our life and what motivates us. Part of our role is to share Christ as the Lord makes it possible. And the first step is preparing the soil. But in some areas, the soil's so hard and has so many rocks on it, we need to start moving some of the rocks before we can even get started. For example, I've read that most Muslims who come to believe in Jesus have to have over 100 positive contacts with a Christian before they even start thinking about the gospel and Jesus as a possible change in their life. Once the soil's prepared, hopefully we can do some planting. Many places we go, you know, we can't just give the gospel, but we build relationships and people observe us and how we treat each other, how we treat them, how we treat patients. And they often ask us, why are you different? Or why did you come? They know we've taken time off from our practice and paid our own way to come and help meet a need that they wanted addressed. And through answering those questions, we can have opportunities to share the reason for the hope that's in us. There's no place I know of that you can't at least answer people's questions, even in places we would think would not be open to missionaries or the gospel. And people do see the differences. I was on a trip to East Asia one time, and our young guide and translator was with us. He was not a believer. And very soon he wanted to be with us during our devotions. And we were talking about the parable of the soils and the different kinds of soils. And when we got to the good soil, he said, I want to be a good soil. And this doesn't happen commonly, but in that first 1 week trip, he came to faith. And now he's the person who sets up our arrangements to when we go back there every year. So answering questions can have a great impact. And we can continue to water even if we're not with them through email, phone calls, Zoom, all the different technologies. I think everybody's getting tired of Zoom, but what a blessing it is and how different it would be if we didn't have it during this COVID outbreak. But I think we also always need to remember it's God who gives the growth. I don't think we need to feel bad if we're faithful witnesses and we don't see people come to Christ. Only the Holy Spirit can bring them to Christ. Our job's to be faithful, and we may be just one little part along the way of somebody's movement in that direction. If you think about your life, at least in mine, there were quite a few different people who played a role. So we need to do our part and trust the Holy Spirit to do the rest. Let me say a little bit more about opportunities to teach and models to teach that can impact others. One type of teaching, of course, is a faculty position at a medical or dental or nursing school, whatever your profession is. This doctor on the top left was the head of the emergency room residency and is now one of the deans at a major medical university here. And she's quite open about her faith and is even the faculty, the official faculty advisor for the Christian medical group there. But she's also taken vacation time to serve with Medical Education International and go teach advanced trauma care and other types of skills in a number of different countries that have made a significant impact. So you can be a faculty person and use either your, if you get a sabbatical or your vacation time to go provide training other places and interact with people in other cultures, help meet their needs, and develop relationships. The doctor on the right is at the same medical university. He's also faculty. He's a trauma surgeon, but he spends 6 months of the year working at the university to raise funds so that he can spend the other 6 months of the year in a mission hospital teaching people and doing surgery. So that's a kind of a split job. I don't know how many countries that might be possible, but I know of a number of people who have done that. And it can have a big impact because instead of going on short trips like the doctor on the left, this other doctor goes 6 months a year, every year, to the same place. Another way we can have an impact, some of you may be in public health and be involved in community development. The doctor on the bottom left is a colleague of mine at a famous medical school in the US, and he has a PhD in public health. And he often goes with different groups from the World Health Organization. For example, he was involved in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And so he rubs shoulders with major leaders internationally in healthcare as well as in the nations he serves. So he can have an impact there in the same way. And then if you're interested in community development, there are groups where you can go longer term, like Medical Ambassadors International. You might have heard of the CHE process, community health evangelism or community health education, where they help train village health workers who go into their villages and provide different kinds of training, including character development and in some countries, Christian character development, or Indian Gospel League, which trains healthcare workers for villages and sends them out. So if you're one of the trainers there, you can multiply yourself to people who can multiply themselves. You can also work in other countries and teach long-term. For example, one of my colleagues works in the top, you see one of the major medical universities in the Middle East. I have a colleague who works in one of those and teaches basic clinical skills and rubs shoulders with every medical student coming through. What an opportunity. Another colleague went to Singapore and trained students there for 2 years. And one of his students went to China and was teaching there long-term and had an opportunity to impact people. And then another friend who had a PhD in environmental sciences went to the Mongolian National University of Medical Sciences and helped them with their research, publications and things. So there are a number of ways you can do this. There are a number of places you don't even need to know another language if you speak English, where there's training in English. There are positions at teaching hospitals. There are government teaching hospitals, and there are places, especially in the Arabian Peninsula, that will hire you to work and teach at their facility. It can be an opportunity to go where others who are missionaries can't go, and over time develop relationships. But there are other government teaching hospitals that may be open to you as well. You can work at private hospitals. Another colleague of mine was working here. This is a Muslim university hospital system. They have hospitals in a number of countries, but she was working there, being paid by a Muslim system to care for patients and be an example of Christ. You can work in helping train residents and develop and shepherd training programs. They may be residencies. They may be basic training in anesthesia, for example, just about every field, there are opportunities to do this. In our country, we even have a Christian family medicine residency. I know Vellore has one too. I don't know, in India, I don't know how many countries may have it, but you might even be able to teach people in your country, teach Christians in a residency, and then many of them eventually go out to other parts of the world and teach others. You can train surgical residents. Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons gave a recent webinar, so I won't talk in detail about it, but you can see the impact they've had. You know, for many years, there were missionaries in Africa doing direct health care, but they weren't really training the people who live there to care for their own patients. And through this program over 20 years, over 100 graduate surgeons trained to US standards have been trained, and many have gone back to their home countries, to different areas of Africa. And some are even faculty now at the programs they trained. And there's even a group of 3 who started and led a whole new residency. So you can see the multiplying impact, doing what your job is every day. Nothing special in a sense, but having a huge impact. You can teach at family medicine residencies internationally. There's one in Kabul, Afghanistan. If you're what I call God's special forces, you're willing to go there. They're in East Asia, Central Asia, Northeast Africa, quite a few places that you could go. And I think many of you know ICMDA also has an international family medicine residency. And a number of people outside India are involved in teaching with that, I think primarily from the UK. You can also teach short term. That's what I've done primarily. I did spend 12 weeks in a Middle Eastern country hospital at one point in my career, but mainly I've gone on short trips of a week or 2. There are a number of different things you can do. There are exchange programs, especially if you're faculty, you might have the chance to do that. Our country in the US has some government-sponsored international programs like the Fulbright Scholars. I don't know if other countries have similar things, but you might look into that. There are numerous international conferences where you can prepare a presentation. You can meet people from many countries and talk about your field, as well as share with them as you get to know them and continue to contact them. There are secular groups that have teaching trips. Excuse me. It's pollen season here. You can even teach healthcare planning, administration, and consulting. This is a real desire at a number of places where hospitals are being turned over from Western missionaries to the local leaders. And some places want specific consultation, for example, in how to set up residencies or faculty development. And you can also do healthcare education. Here's an example of a partnership between the group in Moscow called Moniki, which is responsible for continuing education for its general practitioners. They have about 25,000 general practitioners in the Moscow region, and a Christian group called Agape International has its own clinic and ministry to refugees and the homeless, but they also help with this conference annually and bring in people to help teach whatever the topics are for family medicine, basically. I had a chance to go there and I was able to speak on a medical ethics topic. And of course, it's hard to talk about ethics without at least alluding to where you get your values, your ethics from. And even though I spoke quite gently about values, a number of people came up to me afterwards and wanted to ask questions and find out more about why I felt the way I did about what I taught. This is another example. Probably a number of you have been involved in this. There's an international Christian conference in the Ukraine every year. It's been going on over 10 years now. It was started under Ukraine Medical Outreach. And every year there's an opportunity for people to go over and teach people from many countries. This has grown from a very small group to sometimes over 600 people there. It's in English. Mainly the people who come are those training in English. There are quite a few places in the world that both make money and increase their student numbers by having an English speaking track. So the Ukraine has this, and quite a few of the students are from Africa and are believers, and they organize the conference. And because it's practical, which they don't get a lot of practical experience, many attend, even Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus that are training there, because some have come from Pakistan or India or Iraq or other Middle Eastern countries. And it's a great opportunity. I remember sitting down at one point with a number of people from Iraq and asking them what they thought about Jesus and why. So it's a great opportunity. There are Bible sessions as well. So there are options like this you can be involved in on an annual basis. And of course, you can do clinical teaching. That's primarily what Medical Education International does. And there are other groups that do this too. For example, you might ask, can you have an impact, a long-term impact through short-term teams? Well, we've been teaching in Mongolia twice a year for over 20 years, 2 weeks in the spring, 2 weeks in the fall, except during COVID, of course, it's been closed, and also during the bird flu. But those are the only times we haven't been able to go. And we teach in just about every specialty. Over the years, we've gotten well known and accepted by the Mongolia National University of Health Sciences. We've been able to teach in other parts of the country. The doctor on the top right in the middle is actually from the Middle East originally. And he was the doctor who was able to get this started. And while we're there, besides caring for patients and spending time with colleagues, we meet with their Christian medical group on the bottom left. Here's a time of singing together, and go to their churches and try to encourage them and learn what's happening and be encouraged by them. And then there are a number of other missionaries there and in healthcare. And the bottom right is a picture of the breakfast. The team usually invites one or more missionaries to have breakfast with them and share about their ministry and pray for them. And we've even had conferences to get together all the healthcare missionaries and ministries in the capital. So this is a model I think you could do in a number of countries. Another amazing opportunity has been our 8 years or so in North Macedonia. This is used to be part of Yugoslavia. And through an amazing God-given opportunity, about 8 years ago, a doctor, a CMDA doctor in the US and his colleagues who were praying for 2 years got this opportunity and were able to meet the leaders of the healthcare system in North Macedonia. They initially wanted their specialists in the capital to be trained. And so they actually asked Medical Education International to send 100 doctors there a year at their expense to provide this training. We never could quite get to that number, I think 40 or so a year, but over 8 years, we've had about 200 different doctor visits. Some people have been multiple times. And after a couple of years, it transitioned to mainly teaching students and young doctors who are often much more open to change and to learning. So it's been an amazing experience. And of course, it's an open country. So there are Bible studies going on. People have come to faith. There are many opportunities to just have coffee. And even now during COVID, we're still able to be there, but in more limited numbers. I mentioned before consultations in healthcare education and leadership, and we've been able to do this in a number of countries that are not open to missionaries, places in Central Asia, in the Balkans, it is open. The Ministry of Health in North Macedonia, we've helped them with strategic planning, and a number of other areas in the Middle East and Central Asia that have wanted help. You can also teach specialized courses. For example, advanced life support is very much of interest. You probably know in most parts of the world, motor vehicle accidents is one of the major causes of trauma and death. I think this is a neat example. Maybe some of you will have an idea that we can partner on. But quite a few years ago, I guess probably about 8 or 10 years ago now, the Kenyan Christian Medical Association asked Medical Education International to send people to help teach trauma life support principles. They couldn't afford the official course certified by the American College of Surgeons. And so with a very small number of people, we sent about 5 people a year for 5 years, and trained initially a number of the Kenyans in the course, and then subsequently trained a number of them to teach it. And then they asked us to stay 1 more year to oversee their teaching. So in 5 years with these short visits, they were able to, within a couple of years after that, train over 1,500 people in 3 cities in their country. This training became the standard of care. Eventually, they were able to fund the official course. But the Kenyan Christian Medical Association set up everything on the ground, charged for the course. People value things more if there's a charge. That covered the costs for the venue, and anything left over went to their ministry. And they even took the course to a neighboring country at one point. So I think it's a great model we could use in a number of areas, and I'd be glad to connect you with Medical Education International if you'd like to do something like that. Another amazing opportunity is Cuba. I thought this would be one of the most closed countries, but Medical Education International has an opportunity to go there 3 times a year for about 10 days each, and teach usually in multiple facilities while they're there. We always teach in Havana, and usually 2 or 3 other places. We're partnered with a Christian denomination that's widespread there. And we're even officially approved by the Ministry of Religious Affairs as well as the Ministry of Health. This initially was a hard place, and I think when you start something new, you may find it's hard. But as people kept going back and modeling Christ, it's become very accepted, so that the teams are often able to pray with the Minister of Health, teach in many places. When the faculty teach, they can share about their experience, how the Lord impacts their career. And while the teachers are teaching, other members of the team who aren't go around the hospital and talk with patients and their families, pray with them. One team gave out 4,000 New Testaments. It's just amazing. And we also often teach on autism there, which is in demand in a lot of countries. There's very little services. So God can give you amazing opportunities if you're willing to go and you want to teach. We do a number of specialized teams like pediatric neurodevelopment. Like I mentioned, there's very little services for the disabled in many places. Our group that does autism identification and training usually works with Christian ministries in different countries because they're the only ones providing services, and helps not only train their staff, but brings the parents in or the family and helps train them in what they can do, since there may not be a place to take their child or family member to get that kind of care. And this can also lead to great opportunities. In one Central Asian country, after the group returned after they came back for their second year. They found that one of the mothers had become a believer while they were away, and they were kind of surprised. The one team member had just talked to this mother and shared that God loved her child, that the child was made in God's image, and that stuck with her. And she talked to others there and asked, what's this all about? And so, you never know what word you leave that will start people or move them along the path to faith. There are also groups like PRIME, Partnerships in International Medical Education. Some of you are probably part of it, that teaches in many countries about whole person medicine based on biblical principles. And you can do this in just about any culture, even though it's based on Christian principles. It's the way people were made to be. They want to be taken care of, not only physical, but cared for compassionately and spiritually. And you can get training from PRIME if you're interested in doing this or bringing it to your area. And they have excellent materials available. You can also teach faculty development. So then you're really teaching people who are teachers and equipping them to teach others better. And we've done this in a number of countries that you can see that it's not the kind of area that we tend to have typical missionaries go, or not very many, and great opportunities. So those are some examples. I hope I've convinced you there's a benefit in teaching, and that teaching is a way to multiply yourself and let God use you to help multiply the kingdom of God. There are a number of resources here. The top link is a link that connects you with all the different medical education missions ministries in the US. And there are a number of other ones. And maybe there are some you want to send links to to ICMDA, so they can include, like I know CMC Valor has a lot. These are the founders of this ministry that's now called Medical Education International. And he liked to say, there's nothing better in the world than serving Jesus. I hope you agree. Thank you very much.
Well, amen to that. That's a great note to finish on, Shari. And thank you so much. We've been listening to Dr. Shari Falkenheimer talking about multiplying your impact through teaching, the biblical basis of it, the example of Jesus, and then the principle of multiplication, and then just so much in terms of the practical outworking different models that you can be involved in all over the world. It certainly opened my eyes up wider, and I'm sure it will have done the same for you as well. So we go into question and answer now. So let's move into questions. Shari, I wanted to ask you, first of all, you've been involved in this for so many years in so many different ways, and also you've been a great facilitator for others getting involved. I just wanted to ask you personally how God led you into this ministry.
Well, I grew up in a family that always went to church, and I learned about Jesus and that he died for my sins. But it wasn't until college that I really understood that I couldn't earn my way to God, and that Jesus had provided a way if I accepted his gift to pay for my sins. And after I came to faith that way, I was looking at going to medical school. I've always liked teaching. I mentored people and tutored even in high school. And so as I've gone through my career at each level, I've tried to find opportunities to teach. I've had a couple jobs, I guess you'd say full-time jobs in teaching, overseeing a residency for a year and teaching a mini residency. But as I went along, I just enjoyed teaching. I did connect with missions through, there's a huge missions conference in North America about every 3 years called Urbana. I went there when I was in medical school and really made a commitment to get involved in any way I could. And my senior year in medical school, I actually had a scholarship to help me go work at a mission hospital, which is in the Middle East, and a great experience. So that helped me move along there. That wasn't too much teaching. I did a little teaching. And then as I moved through my career, I looked for other opportunities. About the time I retired from my initial career, I guess you'd say, I learned about Medical Education International and have been involved in many different teams teaching there. I just love to teach, and I'm convinced it has a huge impact, and seems to be something God gifted me with. So that's how I got involved and continue to be involved as much as I can.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like for you, it was just a whole series of little faith steps that God opened doors for you as you walked through your faith journey and brought you into more and more teaching that was really resonating with the gifts that he'd given you. That's a great story, really encouraging. Now, you mentioned, in many of the examples you mentioned were of countries which we might say were closed to traditional avenues of gospel ministry. You can't get in there with the Bible as a teacher, pastor, or evangelist, or limited access countries. Would you just like to say a little bit about the whole idea of tent making, if you like, seeing the profession as a gateway, and particularly teaching in medical schools or postgraduates into countries of limited gospel access?
Yes, I think teaching is a great way to get in. And like I mentioned, there are a number of places that if you're an English speaker, you don't even need to learn the language. The Middle East teaches medicine in English. Parts of these special training tracks in places like the Ukraine, China, other places, you might be able to teach there. There's some opportunities in the Middle East like that. And there's nowhere in the world that doesn't need medicine and healthcare. And to have good healthcare, you need trained people. One reason we have a lot of short-term teams is there aren't always good opportunities to go and be employed in the country. Some people have gone as so-called tent makers or self-funding people and started different organizations, like I mentioned it for the Autism and Developmental Disabilities Ministry. Some have started healthcare consulting groups where they act as an intermediary for the countries to help them with whatever advanced education they want and to locate people who can come in, and we often go through that. Some countries where there is a CMDA, and even quite a few of these countries have them. Like in the Caucasus, we're in a country that we met with their CMDA. There may be one or more of them that work in an influential position and can invite a group to come and teach. We don't always, use our name. We go as physicians or nurses or whatever that are there to help provide the services. So it's pretty much unlimited. Even the most closed country in East Asia, there are opportunities, believe it or not, to teach.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure there are people listening here who are already very active in teaching in their own context. And they're listening and thinking, wow, I wasn't aware of all these opportunities. How would an experienced teacher access opportunities or find out where they might be of help? You've given us some contacts at the end, which we'll make available to people when we write to them afterwards. But any quick tips on how to find a place that fits your background and experience, where you could start off doing this?
Well, of course, the web is great. And often you can search for, something like medical faculty position international or something and get different ones. Depending on your standard of living or expectations or how large your family is and needs, if they employ you, it may not be at the level you live at home. So, your friends might help you with funding. But I don't know any, I do know some people who will help collect opportunities and place people. But for the most part, it's by networking, by looking on the web, connecting with people who can connect you with people. And, probably a lot of the people listening could help connect people with people.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the striking example you gave of the emergency doctor who spent 6 months working in America, and from that could actually fund another 6 months of travel. It's a reminder that those of us who are coming from perhaps Western context or better resource context, we have a lot of resource where we could actually pay our own way and do this. There's a question here from Dr. Marissa Risolta, who is a pediatrician in the Philippines. She's saying, with the current pandemic, what are the challenges you're facing in sharing your faith to the medical students and trainees and in doing mission trips? And how were you able to address them? She says she's been part of her church, which does mission trips, and had to stop doing it for the time being because of the situation they're facing. But how has COVID impacted your ministry, Shari, and how are you moving forward in this context?
Well, like most places, starting last March, we had to close down all of our teams, and there's another arm of CMDA here that does clinical teams, what you think of more typically partnering with a local church and doing clinics. But already last fall, we were able to send a limited number of people. It's amazing how God works. In the fall, there were only 5 countries that you could go to without quarantine, and North Macedonia was one. So we've still been able to go there last fall, and we have people there right now. But another God thing was for several years, Christian Medical and Dental Association and Medical Education International were hoping to get a learning management system online to be able to provide training and continuing education for our members. But it came online last March, which was when everything closed down. And even last spring, because we had this and we had electronic means like Zoom, we were able to do online teaching. It wasn't, of course, as practical or as good, but we did case-based teaching for the students and young doctors in North Macedonia, and we continued to do that in a hybrid model. We had 6 different specialists teaching 1 hour a day each, 6 days a week. So God provides a way, and we're hoping, in the fall or at least by next spring, things will be better for travel. There's nothing like being with people personally, but once you've met them or you've gone a number of times, you can continue the relationship electronically.
Yeah, if you have a relationship already from meeting them, it makes all the difference, doesn't it? But what amazing testimony of God's timing that you had your LMS just all ready to go. And of course, God knew COVID was coming and you were ready for it. That's great. Question from Alex Atubi, who is based in Nigeria. Thanks for a great presentation, Shari, also showing us the many opportunities. He's asking, are there opportunities for physicians in training to be part of any of these? And I guess there's 2 parts there. One is, do you have to be fully qualified as a family physician or specialist, or can you make a contribution as a trainee or resident? But I think also the other part of the question is maybe, is there any opportunity for doctors in the countries you're visiting to be part of your teams and be incorporated and be trained as trainers in that context?
Well, as far as trainees, we're trying to get more younger people involved. It depends entirely on the request. Some countries, like if we're doing faculty development with fully trained, experienced faculty, we rarely can really bring a trainee. In fact, I brought a PhD candidate on a team when I first was working with MEI to a country in Central Asia. And the physicians there were quite, what would you say, resistant that this lowly person who didn't have their PhD yet, even though he gave an excellent presentation, was brought to teach them. So there are cultural issues and that kind of thing, but some places we need fully trained, experienced people. But for example, in North Macedonia, we're teaching medical students, senior medical students and young doctors how to do physical exams, how to do differential diagnosis, doing rounds with them. So we're trying to recruit actually trainees in America to go. North America and Canada, we work together, and we even have some scholarships to start doing that. As far as the doctors in the countries we work, yes, we can partner together. I mentioned Kenya, you know, we've co-taught with people there. We've co-taught in Mongolia with Koreans that are there and Mongolians. Some of the Mongolians have come to faith. One was even a dean. She's now in Japan in a medical school teaching in English for people from many countries, and hopefully we'll make some connections for us that we can partner with them there. So here you have a Mongolian who's become a believer, moved up in her health system. She's a missionary now in Japan, employed and teaching at a Japanese hospital where there are very few Christians, of course, and looking to bring in other groups. We usually try to connect with the Christian medical group or the local medical leaders and churches wherever we go. And we're certainly open to working together. We have to do it on a case-by-case basis, both with trainees and local people, depending on what we're doing and what their expertise is. Actually, I just had MEI just had a request from a doctor in the UK about joining a team. So hopefully we'll do more of that. We've worked with Koreans in East Asia in a couple different countries too.
Well, I know ICMDA affiliated groups in over 80 countries and another 30 or so where we have got establishment. Would love to know about your teams visiting and how they could benefit from that and maybe partner with you. But perhaps a plug too for anyone else listening who does do teaching in other national contexts. Always knock on the door and ask, is there a Christian medical or dental association in that country that you could connect with while you're there, form relationships, and maybe God will bring something out of that. We're just about out of time now. So just one more question, Shari, and from an old friend of yours, Catherine Welsh, who says, "Hi, Shari, keep up the good work. Thanks for your service." But she's just asking about your hopes for the future. Are there places where you haven't been yet, where there's no or limited access for Christians to be involved, that you would like to go? You don't have to be specific naming countries,
Right.
but just in terms of principles, do you have dreams for the future about how your work might be extended into other places you haven't been yet? What the Apostle Paul calls us the regions beyond, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Actually, Christian Medical and Dental Association here has just been doing its strategic planning, and MEI has a goal to make 10 new contacts in difficult to access areas. We have we have a couple of connections in North Africa. We're hoping to be more there. We've been in Egypt quite a bit. We're helping train Egyptians who, it's hard for Christian Egyptians to get residencies, but also there's a Christian hospital being developed to give them residencies and train them. And many of them can go to other Arabic speaking places. They know the language, they know the culture. So, we may not go everywhere, but hopefully by multiplying, we can help people who can go where we can't go. The Middle East is a real heart place for me. I did my first overseas medical mission trip in the Middle East, and I have a real heart for Arab Muslims. God's doing amazing work in that part of the world. I guess that's one, and certainly Northeast Asia, very dark place, would be great to be connected with.
Yeah,
I would
great.
also
Well,
I would love to hear from the people connected here of ideas and models and opportunities they know of, because I only know, of course, a limited amount about opportunities. So maybe there's a way you can send in your ideas.
yeah. Well, you've certainly opened our eyes up to amazing opportunities today. And just a reminder that ICMDA works in 7 main languages. So apart from English, there's French, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese as well. And so if you are fluent in one of those languages because of where you've brought up, or maybe even the skills you've gained, then think about where in the world there might be an open door for you that that people from other backgrounds couldn't get in, and maybe pray towards God opening doors for you. So we've been listening to Dr. Shari Falkenheimer on multiplying your impact through teaching. Shari, we're so grateful for your example and all the advice and questions you've answered. It's been great having you on ICMDA webinars, and we're very grateful to all of you who've come along, asked questions, given feedback, or just been here listening. We'll be praying for you as we go forward. So thank you for joining us again today on ICMDA webinars. Thank you, Shari. Thank you to Josh and our team of translators. God bless you. We'll see you again soon.